Was geht ab, YouTube? Wir schauen jetzt Lenin's Formula for Revolution and Why It Worked. Das ist das zweite Teil der Oktoberrevolution-Reihe von Bestie Marx. Den ersten Teil haben wir ja hier auch schon gesehen auf dem Channel und darauf reagiert. Wenn euch das Video gefällt, lasst ein Like da, schreibt einen Kommentar, drückt auf den Abo-Knopf, filmt die Glocken und checkt mein Stream aus, denn ich bin in der Regel jeden Tag live. Und wir gehen jetzt rein da. Let's go.
Even though the Oktoberrevolution happened over a century ago, and even though there is not yet the imminent threat of such a thing happening in the West, the ghost of 1917 still haunts the powerful and
Digga, das Intro geht so steil, Alter. Ich will das nochmal sehen.
Even though the Oktoberrevolution happened over a century ago, and even though there is not yet the imminent threat of such a thing happening in the West, the ghost of 1917 still haunts the powerful and reactionary, which is why they still beat about it, slander it, and spread fear about it even where it does not exist. Because, even though the danger of communism is not urgent yet, they must demonize and falsify its history to prevent is not urgent yet.
100 Millionen Tote, Digga.
They must
100 Milliarden Tote, Digga.
demonize and
Black Book of Communism is a hell of a drug, Alter.
falsify its history to prevent the revolutionary movement from growing, especially during times where more and more people look for lessons to change the world. The October Revolution shook the foundations of world imperialism and thereby decisively sparked the struggle of the international proletariat and the colonized against the imperialist bourgeoisie. Everyone seriously wanting to change this global system based on oppression, climate destruction, and mass slaughter must learn about its history.
Oh yeah.
What
Oh yeah, baby.
strategy enabled the revolutionaries to topple the ruling class in the biggest country on earth? Which of its aspects could be applied everywhere? And what are the concepts developed and applied by its leaders, which form the basis of any successful proletarian revolution?
Digga, wie geil ist das Intro?
Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov was born in 1870 in Simbirsk, a quiet town in the heart of Russia that would later be renamed Ulyanovsk in his honor. Some decades earlier, the massive Pugachev peasant rebellion had found strong support in this region, which was still home to many oppressed nationalities long resentful of the empire's grip. The Ulyanovs were not wealthy, but they were doing reasonably okay by provincial standards. His father, who died when Vladimir was still a teenager, had risen from a serf background to become a physics teacher. His mother, who lived until just a year before the October Revolution, had also been a teacher, but dedicated her time to raising the family's many children. Her life was anything but easy. Over just a few years, she lost her husband, 2 children, saw one executed, and the other 3 imprisoned or exiled.
Boah.
Vladimir enjoyed a normal education and had a close relationship with his older brother, Alexander, with whom he liked to study. They were such nerds together that whenever someone disturbed them, they'd say, "Kindly favor us
Wie cute.
with your absence. We have to study."
Oh, das ist ja voll süß.
Vladimir quickly made a mark as the pride of the school, as his school supervisor would call him. History often has a sharp sense of irony. That supervisor's son was none other than Alexander Kerensky, the future head of the Russian government, which was to be overthrown by a movement led by the former pride of the school.
Lol. Wie krass. Der Head of Government, den die in der Revo dann overthrown haben, war legit also einer von seinen Schulkollegen oder was mäßig. Crazy.
Before we move on, I just want to say that I put a lot into making these videos, and support on Patreon makes it possible for me to keep doing them the way I do. If you can afford it and
Ja, ohne Scheiß, ey, checkt auf jeden Fall den Channel aus und lasst Support da, Mann, wirklich. Hier. Lasst ein Like da, lasst ein Abo da, schreibt einen Kommentar. Ich werde auch noch gleich einen Kommentar schreiben, aber das ist das Mindeste, was wir tun können, Alter. Wirklich.
Want to help the channel grow and stay alive, your support really matters. Every single person who contributes is greatly appreciated. Thank you. In the 1860s, the vast majority of Russia was still peasants. The so-called Edict of Emancipation we talked about in the last video formally freed Russia's peasantry from serfdom. This was not because Russia's ruler, Tsar Alexander II of the House of Romanov, had sympathy for the poor.
Meine Twitch-Chat-Kommentare schreiben sich auch nicht umsonst. Lasst mal ein bisschen was bei meinem PayPal.
As well
Quatsch, warum bist du eigentlich nicht Sub, Alter?
was the
Was ist los mit dir, Junge?
propaganda back then, but out of adapting to the new economic reality. Industrialization needed a large workforce, and the new banks needed to grow. The noble landowners, looking to profit in the new markets, needed more people to become wage laborers. So this reform replaced feudal bondage with bondage through debt, which in order to repay, much of the destitute peasantry had to find seasonal work in the
Ja,
quickly growing towns.
so geil, Digga. Die haben Freiheit bekommen von dem Serfdom und dann...
Needed more people to become wage laborers. So this reform replaced feudal bondage with bondage through debt,
Ha, komisch. Irgendwo erkenne ich das, oder?
which in order to repay,
Der hat überall Sub von mir. Quatsch, Dame, Alter. Du musst, like... Hab das Sondervermögen beim Jobcenter nicht durchbekommen für Twitch-Subs.
Svenno hat Quatschname ein Abonnement der Stufe
Svenno,
1
Digga,
geschenkt.
du Löwe, danke. Danke für das Gift an Quatschname. Auch wie geil, weil ich ihm noch nicht gegiftet habe. Der hat überall Sub von mir, Alter. Wirklich. Quatschname ist ja richtig eine Bitch, Alter. Geil, Mann. Vielen lieben Dank.
much of the destitute peasantry had to find seasonal work in the quickly growing towns. Back then, the seasonal workers with close ties to the peasantry were more numerous than permanent industrial workers. This interconnection will further the solidarity between workers in the cities and the peasants in the villages, as we will see. In the 1870s, Russia ended
Okay, also dadurch, dass die neuen Arbeiter alle quasi immer noch quasi diesen Peasant-Background haben und wahrscheinlich noch viele Leute auf dem Land kannten und so, hatten die quasi mehr Solidarität untereinander so oder miteinander.
its state oil monopoly and opened the oil-rich Caucasus to private companies. Since Russia industrialized later than Western Europe, its government and banks partnered with and relied heavily on loans and investments from powerful Western capitalists. One of them was the ultra-wealthy Nobel family, which built the largest oil refineries. The chemist and capitalist Alfred Nobel, who was the inventor of dynamite, went on to establish the Nobel Prizes, funded in large part by the blood and sweat of the Russian masses, and still serving as a purveyor of Western imperialist hegemony.
Ja, ohne Scheiß, Alter.
Nobel's dynamite
Wie wir jetzt auch sehen, dass einfach ein fucking CIA-Asset, like ein venezuelanisches CIA-Asset, einfach einen fucking Nobelpreis für Frieden bekommen hat. Obwohl die legit sagt, ey, yo, invaded mal Venezuela, Digga. Also, wer sieht nicht sofort, dass das alles nur Quitschi-Quatsch ist, Alter. Reo-Sama, schön, dass du da bist, freut mich.
company later operated under the IG Farben, a major donor and partner of the Nazis, producing the poison gas used in concentration camps and part of the anti-Soviet counter-revolution. But the Nobels struggled to sell Russian oil abroad because there was no reliable transport route. This pushed the construction of massive rail lines, which was funded especially by French capitalists, foremost among them the Rothschild family, who was also heavily invested in the Baku oil fields.
Interessant, also willst du mir sagen, die ganzen Kapitalisten, die investiert hatten im russischen Zarenreich, waren dann vielleicht ein bisschen abgefuckt, als die Revolution denen ihr Investment quasi weggenommen hat? Und also, dass der Arbeiterschaft zurückgegeben hat? Crazy aber auch.
Other powerful Western firms and families soon joined and built massive fortunes from the plunder of Russia's resources and labor. Those came predominantly from France and Belgium, but also from Germany, Britain, or the US. This left Russia's empire heavily
Crazy, Alter. Singer.
Germany, Britain, or
Singer Sewing Machine kenne ich.
the US. This left Russia's empire heavily indebted to foreign capital. But as usual, this debt fell on the backs of the vast majority of the poor people. And it would be this threat posed to capitalist wealth by Bolshevik nationalization and debt cancellation that would compel countless Western countries to invade the country in order to crush the revolution.
Oh, baby, but they haven't succeeded. Get good scrubs. Da habe ich ein passendes Emote für.
The revolutionary figures and their personal lives covered in this series are of
Boah, Young Stalin, holy shit, Alter. Tschüss.
course important, but
Hot.
these have to be seen in the context of this new reality. Without rising capitalism in Russia, there would be no working class, and without the working class, there is no working class struggles. And without working class struggles, there can be no communist revolutionaries with any significance. Whereas bourgeois democracy is the ideal political form of capitalism, absolute monarchies are typical for feudal class societies. However, while the monarchies had been abolished in much of Western Europe, Russia remained under the outmoded and brutal autocracy of the Romanov dynasty. So this decaying system gave rise to a whole generation of thinkers disillusioned with Tsarist power. Many of these thinkers, commonly, though often misleadingly, branded as nihilists, launched fierce critiques of all authority and demanded revolutionary change. Foremost among them was Nikolai Chernyshevsky, often referred to as an important utopian socialist and the founder of Narodism, which we introduced in the last video. He received high praise by Marx and the Russian Marxists for being important in exercising a revolutionary influence, the idea of the struggle of the masses for the overthrow of all the old authorities. Just a year after the Emancipation Edict, he was sentenced to death. In prison, he wrote his famous novel, What Is to Be Done,
What?
which was an immense inspiration to
Wait, hold up. Hat Lenin nicht auch ein Buch geschrieben, das so heißt? Was tun?
later revolutionaries, among them Vladimir Ulyanov, who will soon write a crucial political pamphlet
Ja.
with the same title.
Ja!
Seeing the brutal conditions of industrial workers,
Shush!
the Narodniks believed that Russia should avoid the capitalist phase entirely, which they associated with negative Western influence. They idealized the peasantry, their communal way of life, that could form the basis for a uniquely Russian path to socialism without passing through brutal capitalism, as many Marxists envisioned. It was uncontroversial among most Russian Marxists that Russia, like other societies, passes through the historical modes of production, successive stages in how people organize labor, property, and class relations. This notion of stages will remain very important throughout the debates we'll talk about in this series. The Narodnik intellectuals wanted to overcome their isolation as educated, privileged members of society
Pipo, schön, dass du da bist. Freut mich.
and connect with the vast majority living in the countryside, leading to the famous Going to the People movement in the 1870s, to live among the peasants and to incite them toward revolution. So the idea was that they go to people to tell them that their system is morally superior, easily convincing the peasants, which are then on board to change society. The notion that political change happens mainly in this way is also a normal instinct among newly politicized leftists, since this explanation of change is conditioned by the dominant consciousness in our liberal society, namely that change happens primarily through the marketplace of ideas and peaceful discourse. Many Narodniks, therefore, adopted a version of the great man theory introduced in the last part, as they believed that the peasantry could not do any of this on their own, but that it needed outstanding personalities to achieve transformation. Friedrich Engels explained the difference between utopian and scientific socialism. Utopian socialists, he said, think that socialism is an accidental discovery of this or that ingenious brain. and not a stage that necessarily arises out of real conditions. Marx and Engels mocked the unscientific view that the genius sociologist, quote, has now arisen, that the truth has now been clearly understood is not an inevitable event following of necessity in the chains of historical development, but a mere happy accident. He might just as well have been born 500 years earlier, and might then have spared humanity 500 years of error, strife, and suffering. In their view, the idea that people will begin to implement a utopia independent of the course of history and the concrete contradictions between the classes is like trying to invent YouTube before the internet exists.
Lol.
There are many manifestations of utopian socialism today as well. Some of them include attempts to shift the idea of revolution from taking power to simply reimagining capitalism in day-to-day life. Modern-day so-called socialists like public intellectual John Holloway argue that capitalism is something that we create every day. So we should just stop.
Aber ey, guck mal, da stand irgendwas mit den Zapatistas. Irish said sociologist and autonomist associated with the Zapatista movement. Oh, damn.
That capitalism is something that we create every day. So we should just stop creating it.
Huh? We should just stop creating it? Bruder, wenn ich könnte, dann würde ich aufhören, so. Aber irgendwie will mein Vermieter jeden Tag Geld von mir oder jeden Monat Geld von mir haben. Und irgendwie muss ich dafür arbeiten gehen. Also wie soll ich denn einfach damit aufhören? Dann bin ich ja obdachlos. Just say no to capitalism, ja. Hello, Mathe hat mich zerstört, aber ich gehe mir jetzt endlich Frühstück holen. Guten Hunger, Red. Ich wünsche dir guten Hunger.
Quote, if we all stayed in bed tomorrow, capitalism would cease to exist.
Also ich meine, I guess, wenn alle Menschen auf einmal streiken würden, dann wird das System zusammenbrechen, so, ne? Aber like, what the fuck? So.
It's a bit like the idea of simply convincing as many people as possible to launch a general strike, as if persuasion...
I mean, das ist ja wahr, aber dafür muss es ja Klassenbewusstsein geben. Ja, safe. Also genau, like General Strike, so, yes, das würde das System zu Fall bringen. Aber die Frage ist dann, was für ein System würde das ersetzen, so? Und was würde passieren und sowas, weißt du? Das, keine Ahnung. Da müsste man halt drüber nachdenken irgendwie.
alone could substitute for the necessary material and organizational conditions. Holloway even goes as far as to dismiss all previous decades of revolutionary transformations made by hundreds of millions of people because these experiments didn't work out in the end anyway.
Huh?
Without really providing good explanations of what exactly did and didn't work.
Okay, I'm a Holloway-Hater now.
Preventing us from learning from history.
Also sagt er einfach, Sowjetunion war scheiße, weil hat ja nicht funktioniert im Endeffekt. Like, my brother in Christ, you know of the USA? You know the CIA? Of course it doesn't work out. Like, what the fuck?
Conclusions and using them to guide future action. Imagine some dude at the physics department that decides to ignore all existing theories and previous experiments, and, instead of standing on the shoulders of giants and move from there, proclaims to reinvent physics entirely from scratch. This kind of leftist reinventors of wheels are shaped by the dominant liberal ideology that treats individual brilliance as more important than collective creation.
Crazy.
I hope this difference between utopian and scientific socialism will become clearer later in this video, as it...
Yeah, got it. Scientific socialism is the good stuff and utopian socialism is the copium.
This key...
Das ist quitschi-quatschi Copium-Stuff.
In
got it. That's, I don't know.
Grasping the
Moraldudelei oder so.
Science of revolution. The Narodniks' romantic strategy quickly fell apart as they were arrested en masse. often at the request of the peasants themselves, who were
Ah!
mostly illiterate and did
Sowas aber auch. Okay, also diese Narodniks dachten sich so, okay, wir gehen jetzt einfach zu den Peasants und wir werden die davon überzeugen, dass unser System besser ist und dann wird unser System einfach da sein und dann wurden die verhaftet. Sowas aber auch. Verrückt.
didn't get what these aristocrat intellectuals were babbling about. As their approach proved ineffective, some disillusioned and impatient Narodniks adopted a more radical strategy by turning to revolutionary terrorism to free Russia. History is too
What?
slow, concludes one activist. In 1878,
History is too slow, Alter. Crazy.
Vera Zasulich, a radical young student from a noble family,
Ey, Communist, schön, dass du da bist.
attempts to kill the police chief of St. Petersburg. In a sensational surprise and against all expectations, the jury finds her not guilty and she flees to
What?
Switzerland. A year later, a new group
Bruder, sie hat versucht, den Polizeichef umzubringen und es wurde gesagt, dass sie nicht dass sie nicht schuldig ist?
is born, Narodnaya Volya, People's Will, which believed that through propaganda of the deed,
Lol.
they would be
Digga, das ist anarchistischer Shit, oder? Hier, Propaganda der Tat? Digga, das ist doch Anarcho-Stuff, oder?
lifting the
So, like, tschüss. Deswegen war da gerade eben auch ein hier Propotkin-Zitat, als es um dieses Narodny-Ding ging. Okay, crazy. Das heißt, oh shit.
revolutionary spirit of the people and its faith in the success of the cause. And after multiple attempts, they take their most desired prize.
Crazy. Ich distanziere mich von jeglicher Gewalterlobung, by the way.
In Switzerland,
Ich bin auch kein Anarcho, by the way.
Vera Zasulich begins to rethink the strategy based on assassinations and starts questioning Narodism in general, and sends letters to Karl Marx himself, asking him whether the Russian peasant commune could serve as a
Elixir, schön, dass du da bist.
basis for the transition to socialism, making the stage of capitalism unnecessary, saying this would be a matter of life and death. Marx replied and said his analysis in Capital described how capitalism arose in Western Europe, not necessarily everywhere. He emphasized that the fate of the peasant commune was not predetermined and depended on Russia's social and political conditions. This exchange showed that Marx's theory of historical change was not rigid and mechanically Eurocentric. Over time, as he began to focus extensively on non-Western societies, he began to recognize that different societies could take somewhat different paths to socialism. He, for instance, began to change his opinion on the revolutionary potential in Russia. At first he thought there was no such potential, and later thought there was indeed. In any case, Zasulich slowly but surely turned to Marxism. In the Swiss city of Geneva, along with former Narodnik Georgy Plekhanov and with former Russian anarchist Pavel Axelrod, they founded the Emancipation of Labor, a small but widely read Russian exile circle and the first proper Marxist group in Russia. Ulyanov looked up to Plekhanov as his guide and intellectual mentor. Their disagreements were not that
Haben auch den gleichen, sehen auch, guck mal, das ist Lenin und das ist sein Mentor mäßig, ne? Und ich finde, du siehst das auch. Like, er sieht einfach aus wie Lenin, nur ist sein Gesicht breiter und sein Bart ein bisschen mehr magnificent, so. Das ist halt verrückt.
important in
Du siehst es.
those early years. However, this would change over time. In
Boah, das Video ist wirklich so geil, Mann. Es ist schon wieder halb vorbei, Mann. Nein!
1881, Narodnaya Volya blew up
Digga, und Scheiß, der nächste Teil wird auch bestimmt so geil, ne? Wenn ihr das auf YouTube seht, dann lasst ein Like da, schreibt mir in die Kommentare, wie euch diese Videoreihe gefällt und drückt vor allem den Abo-Knopf, damit ihr das nächste React nicht verpasst.
the carriage of Tsar Alexander II. But he survived, shouting, "Thank God." But then another attacker threw a bomb, saying, "It is too early to thank God."
It is too early to thank God, motherfucker.
The Tsar finally died.
Distanz der Tod, aber
He
what the
survived.
fuck? Wie, what?
Shouting, "Thank
Das ist ja wie aus dem Film, Alter.
God." But then another attacker threw a bomb, saying, "It is too early to thank God." And the Tsar finally died. The Narodniks believed that this would show to the
Digga, crazy.
peasants that the Tsar was not a supernatural being commissioned by God, but that he was a mortal like everyone else. Of course, the reality was that the Tsar was quickly replaced, but Tsarism itself was not. As a consequence of this action, the new Tsar, Alexander III, who was even more conservative than his father, unleashes brutal repression. He eliminates people's will through a campaign of executions and establishes the foundations of the fierce and notorious secret police,
Digga, das ist so crazy, ne?
the Ochrana, to destroy revolutionary politics once and for all. A notorious, powerful intelligence agency that will play a big part in the coming revolution. The autocracy's propaganda spread the narrative that the murder of the Tsar was a Jewish conspiracy of nobles that killed him because he had freed the peasants, leading to massive police expansion and bloody pogroms against Jewish communities. The
Oh mein Gott, Alter. Hugh Glory, schön, dass du da bist.
narrative that leftist revolutionaries were part of a Jewish plot to undermine Christianity and the old order would remain a potent story for the counter-revolution throughout the next century.
Ja.
But the remaining Narodniks were not chilling, and again aimed for the new Tsar's head to spark a mass uprising. But in March of 1887, the reorganized police proved its efficacy and uncovers the assassination plot. 5 young student activists are hanged, among them the chief ideologist and chemist of the group, the 21-year-old Alexander Ulyanov,
No, das ist der Bruder von Lenin, ne?
who
No!
happens to be the big brother of Vladimir Ulyanov.
F.
This had a profound and lasting impact on the teenage Vladimir, who was devastated. The death of his older brother had sparked his lifelong quest to decimate the empire.
Digga. Gänsehaut, Alter. Gib mir die Stelle nochmal.
Impact on the teenage Vladimir, who was devastated. The death of his older brother had sparked his lifelong quest to decimate the empire.
Digga, tschüss. Alter.
Vladimir Ulyanov was rejected at various universities for being the brother of a death-sentenced terrorist, but he eventually barely managed to get into Kazan University at age 17 to study law. But a few weeks later, he was expelled for taking part in student political activity and was exiled to his mother's small country estate, where his older sister Anna was also put under house arrest, suspected of being associated with Alexander's politics. Anna later was actively involved in the Oktoberrevolution, just like Maria, her and Vladimir's younger sister, who will also be imprisoned and exiled for communist activity.
Alter, tschüss.
Vladimir later remembered how the liberal
Was aber auch für eine geile Fam, Alter. Die sind alle mit dabei gewesen, Junge. Seine Schwestern auch. Later member of the Central Executive Committee of Soviet Union, Revolutionary and Soviet Russia's First People's Commissar of Transport. Tschüss, Digga. Die hat Workers and Resources in Real Life gespielt, weißt du?
Ja.
Löwen, Alter.
for communist activity. Vladimir later
Hey Francis, schön, dass du da bist.
remembered how the liberal neighbors of the Ulyanovs shunned them for being the family of Alexander and developed a deep hatred for their
Torai, auch schön, dass du da bist. Ey, das tut mir voll leid für euch, weil, ey, das Video ist mega geil, Alter. Tut mir leid für euch, dass ihr nicht am Anfang schon da gewesen seid, wirklich.
hypocrisy. In exile, he met old revolutionaries and spent his time studying obsessively in an old kitchen. Especially the newly translated Capital by Karl Marx and
Oh,
other
yeah.
socialist works, instead of studying for university, just like you right now. He was so immersed in the study of Marx's works,
Wer müsste jetzt eigentlich lernen?
rereading them with no options to use Google or ChatGPT to generate summaries. His wife later wrote about him that even during the days after the revolution, at critical moments, he would often say, "Let's ask Marx's advice." He then
Oh, wie süß.
was put under constant police supervision, but was eventually permitted to take his law exams, and as the only student obtained the
Können wir nochmal von vorne anfangen? Nee, ich werde einfach, guck mal, ganz ehrlich. Warte kurz, ich werde das VOD von heute einfach jetzt öffentlich stellen. Warte, ist sogar öffentlich, okay. Das ist öffentlich, also könnt ihr euch danach einfach die Reaction nochmal angucken, wenn ihr möchtet.
highest
Also ihr müsst halt Sub dafür sein, ne? Aber eigentlich schön, dass du da bist.
mark on every subject, graduating with a first-class degree. Whatever one thought of him, both his admirers and opponents agreed that he was not stupid. But his graduation celebrations were soon overshadowed when his younger sister Olga died of typhoid fever at just 19. Another tragedy for the Ulyanov family. He then practiced law in Samara, defending poor peasants. This experience left him hating the class bias of the legal system, distrusting all lawyers in general, even those claiming to be Marxists. And it provided him with a highly refined bullshit detector to spot opportunism and liberalism behind
Highly refined Bullshit Detector, Digga.
leftist-sounding phrases and
Digga, geil.
arguments, as we will see in more than enough instances. While he had great respect for Chernyshevsky, he couldn't stand the later Narodniks. With his training in Marxism, he began to criticize their romantic strategy of going to the countryside and educating people to accept an agrarian-type socialism on a moral basis.
Aha, Moraldödelei spotted oder was? Digga.
Ulyanov said their approach was based on wishful thinking, relying on noble intentions instead of historical materialism, the real class struggle, and the laws of social and economic development that
Shush.
Marxism revealed. He explained that their thinking represented the individualistic, small producer, or petit bourgeois point of view, which, while still in contradiction with the big bourgeoisie, was still different from the consciousness developed by the working class. Modern large-scale industry required workers to think as a collective, recognizing the value of taking on shared responsibilities and discipline, making them capable to lead society into the next stage, one based on socialized production and the workers' leadership in the economy as a whole. Since the petty bourgeois leftist intellectual who accepts market competition as a given and sees exploitation as a moral failing rather than a structural class relation, they imagine that society can be changed through argument and ideal blueprints.
Only a romantic can think that interests can be combated by syllogisms. Was heißt Syllogisms, Alter? Syllogisms. Syllogismen, das Zusammenrechnen logischer Schluss, sind ein Katalog bestimmter Typen logischer Schlüsse. Sie bilden den Kern der im 4. Jahrhundert von Sozialrechnung entstandenen antiken Logik des Aristoteles. Okay. Check nicht, was es bedeuten soll, alles klar. Tamam. Egal, weiter.
Instead of grounding themselves in historical experience and the concrete struggle of the masses, they try to
Mann, ich will
reason
die
their
Zitate lesen, Mann. This is the most obvious symptom of metaphysics with which every science began. As long as people did not know how to set about studying the facts, they always invented a priori general theories. Ah. Also einfach, man kann es sich erklären, deswegen macht man irgendein Wishful Thinking mäßig. Asla
to
Galt.
existence from above. Ulyanov writes about one prominent Narodnik. But the funniest of all is that Mikhailovsky accuses Marx of not having reviewed all the known theories of the historical process. This is amusing
Reviewed sick.
indeed. Of what did 9/10 of these theories consist? Of purely a priori, dogmatic, abstract discourses on what is society, what is progress, and the like.
Oder okay, jetzt muss ich doch googeln, was Priori. Dogmatische Theologie. It's the part of theology dealing with the theoretical truths of faith concerning God and God's work. Okay, also ist einfach Priori sind die Bösen bei Stargate. Ja, okay, also das heißt, Mikhailowski hat Marx accused of not having reviewed all the known theories of the historical process und 9 von 10 davon sind einfach nur irgendein unwissenschaftlicher Quitschi-Quatsch und deswegen ist es highly amusing. A priori heißt sowas wie vorab festgelegt. Ah, okay. Danke.
Mr. Mikhailovsky's accusation is exactly similar to that of a metaphysician psychologist who has spent all his life writing investigations into the nature of the soul without knowing exactly how to explain a single psychical phenomenon, even in the simplest.
Okay, also Geschwurbel. Können wir, okay, also das Ding ist, Mikhailowski ist einfach ein Schwurbler. Gotcha. Enteignungsmotor, schön, dass du da bist.
Just as you cannot argue about the soul without having explained psychical processes in particular, and put particular psychical processes on a scientific footing, you can't make revolution without understanding the concrete processes in your own class society. In the 1890s, Ulyanov read passages from his early works to a St. Petersburg Marxist circle. One member who met him there for the first time said later, "I remember how it thrilled us all. Fairly widely read, they undoubtedly had a strong influence on the Marxist youth at the time. That member was a woman born into a noble but impoverished family from St. Petersburg. Her name, Nadezhda Krupskaya, soon to become
Ey, schön, dass du da bist, Gottes Murky.
Ulyanov's wife and an important Marxist revolutionary." Ulyanov strongly opposed the Narodniks opportunistically taking Marx's letter to Zasulich to confirm their worldview. He explained that Marx thought the commune could evolve into socialism only if certain historical conditions were met, which no longer existed in Russia by the 1890s. The economic reality of Russia had already changed since Marx's letter, he said. Russia's rapid industrialization was driven by massive projects like the Trans-Siberian Railway and the growth of coal, steel and mining industries.
Mein Intro ist die Transsibirische Eisenbahn.
Which all depended heavily on foreign investment. Under the pseudonym Vladimir Ilyin, he wrote the first bigger work that got him clout in Marxist circles, The Development of Capitalism in Russia, where he used data to show that capitalism had already taken root in the country. He analyzed how the commune was already disintegrating, divided between rich peasants, or kulaks, who often became capitalists, and poor peasants, who often became workers, proving that capitalist relations of production were spreading naturally out of the peasant economy. Therefore, capitalism was not a mistake in moral judgment, but a real historical stage that is present in Russia, which has to be dealt with, no matter how much one disliked it. The Narodnik, who considers the bourgeoisie an accident, sees no connection between them and the state. His activity boils down to the modest and precise official liberal activity that is on par with philanthropy, for it does not seriously affect the interests and holds no terror for them at all. The Marxist turns his back on this hodgepodge and says that there can be no other guarantees for the future than the stern struggle of economic classes. Ulyanov
Digga, ich glaube, ich lese heute Staat und Revolution zu Ende, Alter. Ich bin richtig gehypt, so. Hab richtig Bock, noch mehr Lenin zu lesen, Alter.
would later argue that this same worldview, focused on bad leaders instead of class structures, was at the root of the historic betrayal of social democrats. Even today, many people believe that politics is simply a matter of evil or ignorant individuals making bad decisions, and that replacing them with better people or better policies will
Ja, das ist so crazy, Alter.
fix the system.
Ey, wenn Trump weg ist, dann ist alles gut, Leute.
This naturally leads to reformism, just as it did for many Narodniks. But the real point is that power doesn't just corrupt individuals. It itself is shaped by a deeper system that selects and produces the kind of people who rise within it. It's that system, based on the fundamental antagonism of owners and workers, that must be overthrown. The Narodnik sees the causes of these things in that there is little land, taxes are burdensome, and earnings are falling, i.e., in peculiarities of policy, land, taxation, industrial, and not in the peculiarities of the social organization of production, an organization from which the given policy inevitably follows. This was very important to understand for Ulyanov, since, quote, Inability to understand this can lead to such absolute stupidity as that of appealing to the state as though the political system is not rooted in the economic, does not express it, does not serve it. In short, the cause, in the Marxist view, lies neither in policy, nor in the state, nor in society, but in the present system of Russia's economic organization. Or as Marx put it, the sum total of these relations of production constitutes the economic structure of society, the real foundation on which arises a legal and political superstructure and to which correspond definite forms of social consciousness.
Anti, fand ich schön, dass du da bist. Hier, ich kann einmal den... Hier ist Discord-Link.
Ulyanov argued similarly that the organizational focus on individual terrorism is the opposite manifestation of this impatient, petty bourgeois utopianism. It wants to move the masses into revolutionary politics through terror, regardless of how many people are ready for it, as a universal strategic principle above concrete developments. This does not mean that he was against militant action, however.
Mann! In principle, we have never rejected and cannot reject terror. Terror is one of the forms of military action that may be perfectly suitable and even essential at a definite juncture in the battle, given a definite state of the troops and the existence of definite conditions. Lenin, a draft of our party program, 1899. Weiteres Zitat. Precisely because a step like the transition based to armed street fighting is a tough one, and because it is inevitable sooner or later, it can and should be taken only by a strong revolutionary organization which directly leads the movement. Concerning demonstration is 1902.
Like to claim, using his writings to justify a peaceful road to socialism, especially during times where reformist opportunism is the dominant trend. What is important for Ulyanov is whether an organization...
Marxism differs from all primitive forms of socialism by not binding the movement to any one particular form of struggle. It recognizes the most varied forms of struggle and it does not concoct them, but only generalizes, organizes, gives conscious expressions to those forms of struggle of the revolutionary classes which arise of themselves in the course of the movement. Lenin, Guerrilla Warfare, 1902.
Can guide and lead a militant working class movement, rather than attempting to create one outside the course of historical processes. We will learn more about the Bolsheviks' militant tactics and strategy for revolution in the coming episodes, which will make this point much clearer. Although the Marxist critique proved effective, and Marxism became the dominant outlook among Russian revolutionaries in the coming years.
Digga, voll die Atzen, Alter. Guck mal, der hat gar keinen Bock mehr.
Narodniks will remain quite relevant.
Lol, guck mal, das Kind da. Tschüss.
Look among Russian revolutionaries in
Chill mal, Bro, geh mal Minecraft spielen.
The coming years. The Narodniks will remain quite relevant and would congeal into the Socialist Revolutionary Party, a major
Digga, wie geil das aussieht.
player in the coming revolutionary period. So
Aber das sind Lips, ne? Das ist doch SPD, oder?
What does all of this mean in concrete practice?
Like, warte mal, das waren auch die Narodniks, oder?
Narodniks will remain quite
Scheiße, die haben ein cooles Logo, aber die sind nicht based. Fuck.
relevant and would congeal into the Socialist Revolutionary Party.
Aber deswegen hat Lenin doch auch das Buch Was tun geschrieben, oder? Das, like, ist es nicht gegen die Sozialdemokraten und sind die Sozialdemokraten? Eigentlich schon, oder? Keine Ahnung, I don't know, let's see.
Player in the coming revolutionary period. So what does all of this mean in concrete practice? It was not Greta Thunberg's activism that created the climate movement. It was climate change and the way of producing under capitalism that caused it, which made figures such as her relevant in the first place. We make our history ourselves, but in the first place, under very definite assumptions and conditions. It's important to understand that it's the masses that make history. If you want to make revolution, you must realize first that it's not the revolutionary party which can make the transformation by itself, but the working class which fulfills its historical role. The role of professional revolutionaries is to organize and assist the struggle of the most determined and advanced members of that class through a fighting organization, which has a correct analysis of the contradictions in actual society and which can win the hard-earned trust of the people. The communist leaders could only achieve what they did because a large section of the working class wanted change, and likewise, and crucially, the Russian masses could only confront a centralized and militarized autocracy through the existence of an organization capable to organize that fight. Many self-described Marxists in Russia claimed the Marxist doctrine was just a sociological tool to analyze class society. Ulyanov rejected this bastardization of Marxism, which
Ja, das sind die, um die es am Anfang in Was tun geht, oder? Like, ich habe nämlich den Anfang von Was tun gelesen, Alter. Aber habe noch nicht weiter, hab dann einfach Start und Revolution angefangen, weil ich mir dachte, boah, Digga, das ist irgendwie lame. Und hab irgendwie nichts gecheckt am Anfang von Was tun, weißt du? Und deswegen bin ich jetzt bei Start und Revolution drin, da bin ich fast fertig mit. Aber like, so. Okay, Moment.
and likewise, and crucially, the Russian masses could only confront a centralized and militarized autocracy through the existence of an organization capable to organize that fight. Many self-described Marxists in Russia claimed the Marxist doctrine was just a sociological tool to analyze class society. Ulyanov rejected.
Wo kann man Videos vorschlagen? Ausrufezeichen SF. Ist eigentlich das mit Kofi jetzt wieder weg? Nee. Digga, ich check das nicht. Wie soll ich denn das wegmachen, Alter? Warum will Kofi, dass ich verifiziere, dass ich ein Mensch bin? Wie soll ich das machen?
This bastardization of Marxism, which was not simply an analytical instrument, but a guide for revolutionary action. But how to build such an organization rooted in scientific socialism? Or as Ulyanov will ask, what is to be done? This will be answered.
Boah! Cinema, Alter! Absolut Cinema! Was ist das denn?
The guide for revolutionary action. But how to build such an organization?
Das ist crazy. Ist Kofi in einem Browserfenster in OBS offen? Nein. Ist ein. Also ist ein. Eine Browser-Source. Aber. Ich check halt nicht, was da abgeht, weil wenn ich die Quelle der Browser Source also in meinem Browser eingebe, dann ist alles okay. So. I don't know, Mann. Egal. Ey, scheiß drauf, lass das Video zu Ende gucken, wir sind fast durch.
In scientific socialism, or as Ulyanov will ask, what is to be done? This will be answered in the next episode. As opposed to Plekhanov's circle, which was
Digga, wir brauchen Cinema-Emote.
preoccupied with writing, Ulyanov, together with other Marxists, founded a new group, not just to educate, but to agitate and assist the masses in the surging wave of protests and strikes. Among the founders was Ulyanov's close friend and collaborator, a certain Yuli Zederbaum. The close comrades would eventually part ways in a historical split that would define leftist politics in the coming decades.
Menschewiki, Alter.
As was common in the Tsarist Empire, the revolutionaries would give themselves different names to dodge the secret agencies. Yuli Zederbaum calls himself Julius Martov, and Vladimir Ulyanov would henceforth be known as Vladimir Lenin.
Keine Ahnung, Digga. Hier, komm, Kommentar. Alter, lasst auf jeden Fall Liebe bei dem Video da, wirklich. Holy shit. Wenn euch das Video gefallen hat, dann lasst mir auch ein Like da, schreibt einen Kommentar, drückt den Abo-Knopf, mit die Glocken und ja, habt noch einen schönen Tag. Bis dann, haut rein. Ciao.